Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to IEA Bioenergy Webinar entitled Biohubs and the Role they Play in Biomass Supply Chains. My name is Chiara Benetti, and I welcome you on behalf of ETA Florence Renewable Energies, technical organizer of this webinar. The webinar will be presented by Bruno Gagnon, from the Canadian Forest Service, Heather McDonald from the Canadian Forest Service as well, Adekumbi Adetona from the Canadian Forest Service, Biljana Kulsic from the European Commission DG Energy, Brianna Brochet from VP Innovations, and Dino Mealy from Greenleaf. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be published on IEA Bioenergy website from tomorrow. During the webinar, you will have the opportunity to drop questions by using the Q&A button that you can find at the bottom of the screen. Our presenters will have the possibility to reply to your questions by simply typing the reply in the Q&A tab or by replying live during the webinar. Please do use only the Q&A tab for these questions and not the chat. The chat box is supposed to be used only for greetings. That's all by my side for the instructions. So I'll give the floor to Bruno and enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara. So today, the first presentation will be done by Heather Kumbi, Biana, and myself, and we will be talking to you about the results of a workshop we held with Canadian experts on biohubs and biomass supply chain, which was organized jointly by IEA Bioenergy and Natural Resources Canada in June last year. This presentation is meant to set the stage, and afterwards we will hear two very interesting case studies from different regions in Canada, from Brianna and Dino. So please stay tuned for the entire hour and a half. We will present starting with Kumbi. So Kumbi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for that introduction. So what is Biohub? A biohub links biomass supply chains and the markets that they serve by acting as an intermediate place where multiple biomass suppliers can deliver byproducts such as straw or wood residues to be processed into commodities with higher quality and value, including pellets. A biohub is referred to by many names, including biomass logistics and trade centers, biomass logistic and distribution points, since it serves various functions such as storage, loading, recycling, and processing facilities, allowing biomass to be transported for various end users. Despite this potential benefits of biohubs, several challenges could limit their implementation in Canada, including variability in biomass availability due to weather conditions, seasonality, and regional differences. Additionally, efficient logistic and transportation of biomass from suppliers can pose challenges because of the low density of these materials. Furthermore, the startup costs of a biohub are high, and integrating various technologies for biomass processing, conversion, and product development can be technically complex, requiring substantial investment in research and development. Lots of opportunities here. Strategic planning and collaboration among various stakeholders are necessary to address these challenges, which highlights a major opportunities to enable biohubs in Canada. As the bioeconomy continues to expand, the demand for biomass feedstock is expected to rise, so biohub can be well positioned to offer integrated solution for biomass supply and processing. Moving to biohub business model. A biohub business model is essential for optimizing processes within biohubs, bioenergy, and the broader bioeconomy. The theoretical biohub business model emerged from 2 workshops that were held in Europe in 2019 and Canada in 2020. With models, typically they are validated using secondary data and case studies. However, gathering feedback from stakeholders, including focus group, is crucial for a theoretical biohub business model to be effective. Let's move into the business models canvas. It's a strategic management tool that visually frames the development, description, and analysis of a business model. Therefore, presenting a theoretical business model canvas to stakeholders, such as biomass suppliers and the bio-based industry, can provide valuable insights into practical application of biohubs for bioenergy within the broader bioeconomy. We go to the next slide to talk about the components of this business model canvas. So this figure illustrates the 9 components, including cost and revenue right at the bottom. They are building blocks of business model canvas. Every model begins with the value proposition, the first one that you see there, which are the goods, services that a company places in the market. A biohub utilizes value propositions to distinguish itself from competitors and to enhance the operations of its customers. Key propositions of a biohub could include the sales of biomass, ensuring a consistent and reliable source of biomass for customers, for instance, by securing feedstock supply contracts. Then we have key partners, which is the next one that you see there, including biomass suppliers. And of course, the supply of biomass will be a key activity. Key resources such as biomass processing equipment and skilled personnel to help in delivering the proposition. For the customer side, the last 3 bars that you see there, the customer relations, customer segments, and channels are very crucial. For instance, it is essential to build strong customer relations with industry stakeholders, forest owners, and local communities for a successful biohub. Identifying distinct customer segments, such as industry seeking sustainable materials, can help tailor biohubs offering effectively. Selecting channels like informative websites can enhance the communication of value proposition to target audience. And now the bottom, the cost structure. This includes both fixed and variable costs associated with biomass procurement, processing, and transportation. Biohub can generate revenue by selling processed biomass and offering biomass processing services. I would like to say that the aim of the slide is to present ideas of the elements that should be considered for establishing a biohub. It is crucial to note that these elements can vary depending on the need of the business. To move beyond the theoretical business model, a workshop titled Business Model for Biohubs in Canada was conducted on June 2023. The workshop brought together 27 pre-selected individuals from various organizations representing diverse stakeholders in the Canadian bioeconomy sector, including those on the supply and those on the demand sides, as well as policy and academia representative. Workshop objectives were to present a theoretical biohub business model, utilizing business model canvas templates, adapting and customizing it to the Canadian context based on participant feedback, and to dig deeper into specific model components to enhance the overall model effectiveness. And lastly, to establish a platform dedicated to sharing information on engagement requirements for biohubs to improve the existing theoretical business model. Here is a schematic diagram of the workshop presentation, showing the aim and the objectives, and also illustrating how feedback from stakeholders will result in a portfolio of business model for biohubs within the broader bioeconomy. I would now like to pass the mic to my elder to describe the survey that was carried out prior to the workshop activities.
Thank you. We developed a survey before the workshop, and participants were invited to complete an online survey to provide information about their work, province, or territory in Canada, the nature of their organization, and number of employees. The survey responses were aggregated, and we presented the survey results to the workshop as well. We had 20 respondents from Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. The largest group was from Ontario, and together those three major wood-producing provinces represented about 70% of our survey sample of 31 people. But we also had representation from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. In terms of the organization, the respondent organizations varied, with almost 1/4 of survey participants from nonprofit organizations. That's 7 respondents, compared to 6 from provincial governments and 6 from academia. We had 5 respondents from the federal government, and 4 respondents were from industry and 3 from research institutions. Perfect, thank you. So we allowed people could respond in terms of the next question. People could be part of more than one sector. 22 out of 31 respondents were from the forestry sector. So that's something to keep in mind. It's mainly oriented towards forestry, but we did have 4 respondents from agriculture as well, but it does tilt towards forestry. More than half of the respondents were from the bioenergy sector, about 17 respondents. And respondents were also asked about their familiarity with biohubs, which were defined for the survey purpose as biomass processing centers. Most respondents were somewhat familiar with biohubs. 20 out of 31 were somewhat familiar with biohubs. In comparison, only 1 respondent described themselves as very familiar with biohubs, compared to 10 that were not at all familiar with biohubs. So it's just a caveat to keep in mind that we might view this as being an exploratory look with respect to the respondents. And I will now turn it over to Biana.
Thank you, Heather. So what we got there, so this is just to impress you. So it's not intention, there is no intention that you look at these details. But what we did, as Kumbi has presented, we have outlined a theoretical business model for a business hub, which started from the biomass trade center, I would say based on wood, or whatever one would imagine of the pre-selected respondents. And then we said, instead of having this value proposition of selling biomass for bioenergy, we change it to selling renewable carbon contained in biomass for the best market value achieved. So the purpose of the biohub manager would be to find the best value for that biomass, be it bioenergy or any other use within the broader bioeconomy. So we had these basics, and then we invited participants to put post-its how we can broaden up our theoretical. So it was quite interactive workshop. Next, please. And then when they put these ideas, what we can put under key value proposition, key resources, key activities, partners, this is just the left part of the business models canvas, which is infrastructure. The other one is now missing. So we didn't present you this one for the customer segment, but then we asked the participants to rank, we give them right to choose 3 of the prepositions, and to grade it in the way they find it fit, like what is the importance of those to be elements of the most implementable to their view of biohub. So this is, you see these blue circles, how many votes are given. And then next slide. This is transformed, for instance, value proposition, the values, the ranking given for value propositions is transformed like this. And you can see basically that none of these activities is actually standing out. So they are all between 22 and 11%. So they are like very very well diverse. And then we did Pareto analysis, very simple one. What of the activities are making 80%? And we cut off the last two ones. So basically, we have seen that feedstock supply contracts, economies of scale of leveraging, biomass use consultation, and biomass conditioning for optimal value would enter the Biohub consultation. So now we go from this slide to the next one. At this moment, we are just explaining you the logic behind, because there is no one solution of a business model. Business model actually is the way how a company is distinguishing between other companies or other businesses in the same line of business. Meaning they will all sell wood, but the way how they perform, how they assemble the infrastructure and make the partnership will differ. And this is going to make the difference also in the prices and the benefits. So we start here with the proposition. Renewable carbon was dropped down, and it was actually for feedstock supply contracts was the highest ranking business value proposition. So we will just go with the first one, because each of these five would have its own linkages throughout the business model, and we have limited time to present what we have all discovered, but there will be a report, and you're welcome also to contact us if you find something to add to this, what we're going to present. So we have this value proposition. And next, please. So look at now only the first layer, which is the feedstock supply contracts. And with this, we will provide biomass, and for cross, next please, we will have some kind of benefits. These benefits will reflect either in terms of money, so we will have some revenues and then at the end profit, but also in perks and fringe benefits. So it is not limited only that this value proposition linked with money only. So then we will, for this value proposition, to make these benefits at the market, file sales on the market, we would need some kind of infrastructure. Next, please. So we would need key activities next, and that would be biomass supply. So this fits. And then the next one, we will also need to have it certified. Next. And this biomass supply would also have kind of costs. So we would need to bring that biomass to the market or to process it, we would need to have some kind of cost assigned. So what else do we have next? We will also have to have cost on sustainability cost certification. Next. Full fiber utilization, of course, because now we are looking not only on bioenergy, but bioeconomy further, and cascading, please next, cascading use of biomass. So, but these key activities will also be linked with, next please, with key resources. In order to have this biomass supply, we would need, first of all, personnel. And personnel from these key resources is missing, but we would add to each activity, we would add personnel later on. So to have biomass supply, we would need some kind of equipment. Please, next. So supply equipment, storage expertise. Next, we would have transport and delivery. We would have also sustainable biomass certification assurance. So that would be the resources. Next, please. And whatever we don't have in the key activities and key resources, we would outsource and we will make them key partners. So for us, key partners would be biomass suppliers, because in this group, it has been assumed that we don't own this biomass. So there would be foresters or somebody who has biomass, and these are going to be our key suppliers. Next, please. But then we will have also the key partner to have sustainability certification organization. And this has to be linked with the key resource number 6, sustainable biomass certification assurance, and make sure that it is not duplicated. The same things happens with the logistic partner that here has been listed, but next. has to be investigated, the relationship between if we have logistic partner, whether we need biomass transport and delivery, or this is going to be outsourced. It is not either or, maybe it could be combined because the logistic partner doesn't have enough of capacity to do what we would like to have delivered biomass, but also it could be an obsolete activity. It could be either or. So this is how the participants in the limited time has listed what would be the key partners, key activities, and key resources regarding the value propositions. And now we are checking all that colorful post-it map that we have collected the inputs from the participants, and we see if they are reasonable and complete. So this is the logic that we are passing, and through each of these value proposition, we will do the infrastructure, and then on the next, we will go for the customer segment. So of course, we are going to sell this biomass to whom? Next, the greenhouse gas emission reduction industry, and next, the defossilization required industry. So in Europe, we have this ETS scheme. So this is the customer segment. Next. But here, it is also very interesting that this was outlined as a customer segments, and we need to investigate why is that, because biomass residue companies might be placed in key partners because they supply biomass, and now we are selling them. Maybe it was thought that they don't have sufficient of biomass for the process heat or for whatever they use, and they would need to have extra, and that's why we are going to supply them. So, but we need to investigate the logic, what was behind it, because it has been highly ranked 25 votes. So to reach these customer segments, next, we have customer relations, and the next, these are the channels. So given the limited time of this webinar, we are not going to go through all these, but the outcome of our report and later on scientific paper is going to be actually development of different biohub business models that would work in the Canadian context. And now I leave it to Bruno.
Thank you very much, Biana. So what were the key learnings from interacting with the experts and listening to what they had to provide on the business model canvas? First, if we are to be successful in biomass supply to support the growing bioeconomy, then there needs to be different things in place. We're talking about strategic partnerships, operations that are optimized, access to the resource, strong consumer relationships, and other things like that. So it's not a simple thing, but can be done. And while there are opportunities, as we see with the biohub business model, there still remain challenges in implementing those elements in a way that is that works in real life. And what we see is that tailored to the unique bioenergy and bioeconomy challenges and opportunities for Canada, the workshop provided insights for how biohubs could be implemented and how a business model could be successfully implemented. There are still only limited examples to point to in Canada for biohubs, which means that best practices and key success factors remain mostly to be defined, but we're lucky to have two very interesting projects that are investigating that model to present today, following our own presentation. And that integration of biohubs within supply chains, it's nascent. It's a new concept. It's going to evolve over time. And this is how we will learn how they can best support business opportunities. And maybe where we are in 5 years, 10 years isn't necessarily exactly where we think we're going to land now. But there still remains potential, and that will be figured out over the next couple of years. Next slide. So this this seems to illustrate why now is a good time to take a closer look at biohubs. And I'm starting with a typical forest wood fiber or forest supply chain. So we have harvest operations, mostly targeting softwood, going to the sawmill to produce lumber, and then residues are being sent different places. We have composite panels with pellets and pulp and paper, taking the largest share of those residues. So in that setting, with a few limited actors, with operators that have been working together for decades, there's no real need for a biohub, or there will be limited contribution. But then we add new things. On the supply side, if you want to click, can we please? We have a multiplication of new sources of biomass. We're talking hardwood with new uses. We're talking like thinning operations, which is still pretty limited right now in Canada compared to other countries. We want to be more resilient to wildfire around communities. So fire smarting operations. We want to make the most of wood fiber that's been impacted by disturbances such as pest and fire. We have harvest residues that can be collected, namely to mitigate wildfire. And we also have in urban areas demolition waste. So those are all emerging kind of new sources of forest biomass that can be mobilized to support new demand for bioproducts and bioenergy. And then we move to the end uses. Beyond the typical ones, we're now seeing interest from heavy industry to decarbonize, looking at RNG and hydrogen production, biorefineries, whether they are attached to a pulp and paper mill or a standalone facility. Also biochar and district heating, and there will be others. So how do you connect all those new sources of biomass that end users are looking to without necessarily having or needing to go through the usual flow of wood fiber in the established industry in the forest sector? And this is why there is, we believe, growing interest in the Biohubs model, to be able to connect those multiple potential biomass sources with new users that really go beyond like the traditional forest sector. Next slide. Study limitations. As we mentioned earlier, this really focused on forest supply chains, and there is a need and there is a will to further engage with other bio-based sectors, because agricultural feedstocks would have different considerations, different characteristics, and their supply chains are set up in a way that's different than the forest sector supply chain. We add 27 participants, which was good for a specific topic like biohubs in a virtual webinar or workshop. But then it's still limited, considering that conditions vary greatly across regions in Canada. So what's happening in the eastern part of the country will be different than the central provinces, and in the west, and even in those larger regions, there will be differences. So really, those discussions would need to take place maybe on a regional basis, and exploring how biohubs can meet challenges and opportunities in those regions. And there was also limited participation from Indigenous participants. So this would also be something to look more at. And the second case study today will point to the value of such involvement. And then thirdly, the results are exploratory. So we're kind of taking a first shot at that, at the biohub concept, and starting a discussion with experts in Canada. We are providing insights, initial perceptions of representatives. The aim here is not to present a fully validated, bulletproof business model. It's really to get the discussion going and put something in front of you, in front of everyone for further input and further refinement. Next steps in that work. Of course, it will be interesting to obtain real-life cost and revenue data through case studies to be able to demonstrate how and under which conditions biohubs can serve a purposeful function. There's a will to connect with more stakeholders designing and operating biohubs, and the case studies we'll be presenting today is part of that work. And we want to validate the model and demonstrate how and when it can be successful. Further studies should also investigate how investments in biohub supply management, also combined with policies, would facilitate biohub development. So what's the right mix of maybe public support and industry involvement to see those biohubs emerge? And there's also a plan to replicate the workshop in other countries, other regions, so we can compare what's similar, what's different, and we want to be able to offer lessons on crucial factors so that each region can learn from others and really zoom in those essential elements and foster innovative thinking. So we have a few minutes for questions. I know a few of you posted questions in the chat. Some of them are very specific, so we will handle them maybe through written answers. But we can also answer a few of them before we move on to the next presentation. So we can take a question from Adarsh. He's looking to know if economic indicators for the success of this business model, including payback period and PV IRR, have been calculated.
I can take that.
Yeah, please, Biana.
Yeah. So that's the typical question that we get on the business model canvas. So business model canvas is painting. So at the moment, we are not at the level of ERR and financial rate of the return and the cost benefit model. Once we decide what is our business model, because as you see, we have still things to figure it out, whether we want to outsource someone or we would like to have it as a key activities. Do we want something to be internal or external? What would be the perks? What would be the benefits? Because also perks are opening many doors. So, and that would function very much locally. So there is no one prescription. That's why business models are actually secret ingredient of the success of the company. You can see Uber and you can see the taxi drivers. The same service, different business model. So that's why we don't have this at this level so finely granulated. And I don't think that we will do that at this level of study within this project. But what would be interesting is to see what would be the replicability of business models, what would be the assessment or the feedback from the colleagues that are actually implementing and managing biohubs, biomass, to see what would be the implementability of different business models that we would develop. And then later on, maybe in the next project, maybe next research period, or somebody else would develop technical economic analysis and the analysis you have listed.
Thank you, Biana. And maybe we can take another question from Siva Ramakrishnan. How do you plan, so ourselves, to factor in stakeholder-specific challenges, barriers, without defining value chains or a value chain of interest, such as capabilities, values, capacities, etc.? So, Biana, I don't know if you want to...
Actually, I don't understand it. So, basically, a biohub would be placed somewhere where there is biomass, so it is boosting the existing biomass trading place, whatever the form of this biomass trading is. And the idea is to find the best value at the market for that biomass. And if there is none, could be theoretically chemical industry, for instance, would be the best, but there is none in available around, it's not going to happen. So specialities and know-how, they can be purchased or contracted, but I don't know how, I don't understand the question because it's very much context related. And
Yeah,
that
so
is
so
up
I
to the
think
biohub manager to define what ingredients or what paints he can put or she can put on the canvas.
yeah, so I get that the business model doesn't identify like exactly which value chain. And I believe that's part of what the business model wants to serve in terms of purpose. So we provide most, hopefully all of the key ingredients that any specific project or biohub developer would need to look at. But then how do they integrate stakeholder specific challenges, barriers in their value chain, in their setting? And then that would be to each proponent, each developer to further research and document all those key components that we're proposing. So we propose a framework. Of course, our framework, the results we presented today are more tailored to the Canadian setting, the forest sector supply chain. But then it would be up to everyone else to take this framework and adapt it to their own particularities and their own setting.
And if I may add to that, Bruno, when I was sharing the business model canvas, I said that it is to give us the ideas of the elements that can be considered. So these elements can be tailored to the specific need of the business. So that might address that challenge that is required for that particular business. I hope that clarifies things a little. It can be modified, it can be customized to meet a particular need.
So I can say the benefits of countries that don't have so much forestry abundant biomass because we have a global participation. So what we have noticed in other countries with not such abundant forest biomass, that some streams from agriculture and food and agri industry, they are not deployed because there are just not enough of quantity. So, for instance, the hazelnut shells, for instance, of all these nut shells, or some biomass would be, given the climate change, too dry to be used for bioenergy or for any other appliances, or short rotation copies would be too wet, too expensive to dry it out to the proper heating value. So, and then they are not utilized. But the idea is that in biohub, the biohub manager would be this biomass barista that would blend different sources or different feedstock of biomass to the needs of this buyer or the company that is using. So if this company needs biomass, tolerates biomass of 60% of moisture content or 30% moisture content, the barista will make it. So it will not use only the top quality biomass, but also degrade it to the level that the market can endure and still provide good service. So this is the idea of a biohub, finding the best value of biomass at the market that is existing, and also attracting other biomass flows that will otherwise not be utilized because they were too scarce or too limited or not attractive and similar.
Thank you, Biana. So to keep up with the schedule, we'll move on to our next presenter. Dino Mealy is Greenleaf Power Asset Manager, and he will be talking about forest biomass recovery for the production of bioenergy, biochar, and green hydrogen. Dino has more than 30 years experience in the industrial and renewable energy sectors and has worked on energy projects representing investments of more than $450 million. And Dino's presentation will add a layer of concreteness or more tangible considerations around the concept of biohub, which we really need at this point. So Dino, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Bruno. You're quite nice in my introduction there. Some people have called me other things, but anyway. Greenleaf Power is in the business of doing bioenergy. It's headquartered in Sacramento, and we own 4 power plants, one which is located in Quebec, in Canada. So kind of an offshoot of the biohub concept is one that was labeled by the Quebec government as regional energy ecosystem. It's really kind of a subset of this biohub concept, predominantly aimed at the energy sector, the bioenergy sector. I mean, Quebec has put forward a what they call a green hydrogen and bioenergy strategy. Like much of the other governmental organizations, everybody wants to move towards decarbonized carbon neutrality somewhere into the future, and obviously people are trying to put benchmarks along the way in terms of trying to reach their objectives. Quebec is no different. It wishes to reduce its GHG emissions by 37.5% below the 1990 level by 2030. As part of that objective, it's going to want to reduce 40% of petroleum use by 2030 and eliminate the use of thermal coal. And so these are kind of long-term, which are getting closer. But Quebec has been blessed to some extent with substantial hydro resources, wind power, biomass resources, and it's driving towards those objectives with a lot of effort. The green hydrogen and bioenergy strategy is really creating a framework to try to put those efforts to work as quickly as possible. So the regional energy ecosystem is really a model that really tries to encourage the production and local consumption of products, green hydrogen and bioenergy, as well as stimulate regional economic development, as well as the bioeconomy sectors that could stem from this development. And I think the third point is really the key point. Does this model really reduce the risks and the costs? Because everybody wants to be green. The real hard question to answer is at what price or cost are we willing to move forward on? So if you can move below the current cost, well, that's easy. If you can move at parity, that's not too bad. The challenge becomes when people have to ante up in terms of additional costs to move forward. In this green hydrogen strategy, obviously the aim is to decarbonize and put resources to work. And the best resource that Quebec has at its disposal is green electricity, which it's going to try to electrify as many things that we do today that is not electrified. 70% of all GHGs in Quebec is actually the product of fossil fuel combustion. So, there's what we call the low-hanging fruit that are going to be easy to do, where you can convert to electrification and you will decarbonize. And what we see in terms of this GHG impact is that Quebec has done a relatively good job overall. It's 2.7% below 19 levels. However, the closer you look, there's some disturbing patterns that are obviously would need to be addressed. One of them is the fact that the transportation sector, while things have been going down, transportation sector has been going up. And in that transportation sector, heavy transport is a big component. So if it has to meet its objectives, it's going to have to be able to tackle that big challenge, which is the heavy transport. Now, in the transportation sector, there's an easy solution, right? I mean, obviously cars, light SUVs, electrification is a fine solution, which is getting implemented, and there are great products that will compete on price parity and performance with the fossil alternative. However, in heavy transport, that's where the options become few. Batteries are not able to perform in certain key sectors. When we call what we call heavy transport is really trucks that are in as a gross weight vehicle about 110, 115,000 pounds. That is heavier in the US, and we are obviously colder than the US. So both things are not what you would call conducive to batteries. So hydrogen is seen as a solution in the heavy transport sector. One thing that should be pointed out is where we're at. Well, we have a big country like Canada, and obviously Bruno indicated that solutions tend to be regional, and I totally agree. I mean, what we have here is the forests of Quebec, of Canada, and where we're located in the boreal forest. So what we see outside our windows are basically a forest that's predominantly black spruce and fir in terms of softwoods. There are some hardwood species, but very limited. These tend to be aspen and birch, white birch, and they have what we call limited usage in their value application. So 95% of all wood, because Quebec is actually managed through the Quebec government, is on Quebec government lands. So the Quebec government allocates this resource, and 95% of this allocation tends to be softwood allocation. 5% are hardwood allocations. And most of the softwood, when it is harvested in terms of what we call the softwood integrated supply chain, the wood is basically harvested in the forest with machinery and in round logwood forms and sent to sawmills, where the sawmills will debark the material, extract the most amount of lumber from it, as well as it will produce chips and byproducts like sawdust and bark. As one gentleman from the sawmill industry kindly told me, trees are round and lumber is square. So that we have about 45% recovery in lumber, and the rest is basically chips, sawdust, and bark. And it is sent to other users in this integrated chain. Most pulpwood and forestry, pulp and paper operations don't have their own wood yard. They tend to be integrated and bring in chips for usage. Our Quebec plant is called Saint-Félicien, Société de Cogénération de Saint-Félicien. It is a power plant that is 22.5 megawatts in production. It uses the bark, and the reason it uses bark was, as it was noted before, in this supply chain, bark was the unutilized material of the sawmill operations. The plant was actually built to provide a solution for bark disposal, which going back in time in the year 2000, this material was landfilled, and that caused a lot of issues. So the cogeneration plant provided not only renewable firm power, the ability to sell green steam, but it also provided an environmental solution to bark disposal. Now, in the reconcept, why are we looking at the cogeneration model to expand on it for value added and other environmentally beneficial attributes? Well, because there is still a substantial amount of thermal energy that is not utilized in a biomass power plant. The power plant has cooling towers, which emits this energy to the atmosphere, and the flue gas temperature is quite high. So those are two good sources which we can tap into to utilize and bring value to other products, as well as tap into the infrastructure that we have in terms of equipment, scales, electricity, water, and all the other good stuff. And lastly, but quite important these days is actually people. Trying to develop new technologies, new endeavors requires ultimately people. So the more that you can graft onto something in terms of know-how and expertise, the easier it is to move into the next phase. And that's why the cogen provides a workable platform that will provide services as well as a backstop to the future development. It acts really more like an anchor tenant in a shopping mall, where you have a large shopping mall with one big customer at the end, and then you're able to graft on a whole bunch of little smaller tenants in your shopping mall. The project we're talking about has three components that will be grafted on to move into the re-concept, and we're supported in that endeavor by the local government and other local partners who have what you would call an interest in seeing the bioeconomy develop, basically looking at the challenges that the traditional forest sector is facing in terms of its product lines like newsprint, as well as its continued sustainability requirements, as we see put-asides and forest fires that shrink potentially the availability of forest biomass. So the first partner that we see that coming to the table with us is the city of Saint Félicien. They have been granted the rights to the cooling tower, and they will be charged with implementing the first part, which is the district energy. This is a low temperature district energy that will be made available to other people in the to be utilized for whatever purposes, be it for greenhouses, biochar drying components, as well as potentially others that are in discussion at the moment. The second project is really the forest biomass recovery. Now, when we said about the resources that is available, while it looks abundant, we have a huge landmass with a whole bunch of forests in it. The availability is quite constrained. It's hard to fathom, but if you were to knock on the door and say, I want biomass resources, your availability of resources are rather limited. And that limitation really is to what is left in the forest. The third project is really the biochar and the green hydrogen project, which I will explain later. But the forest biomass preparation is really what falls in line with the biohub concept that has been explained. And as part of the re-concept, we have attached a technology partner, which is Char Technologies, which brings its high temperature pyrolysis technology to the table, which is really a technology that will pyrolyze wood to produce biochar and a syngas. And of course, the parameters are always dictated by the type of biomass that you put into the system, as well as other factors. But what is interesting about their technology is that they operate at a very high temperature compared to other pyrolytic processes, which allows them to produce a syngas, which is of rather high hydrogen content, as well as good quality. Okay, so the challenge is what we have, is what we're going to move forward on, and what we have in the current situation is the bio chain and supply chain that we have today, which is roundwood cultivated in the boreal forest, is brought to the sawmill, chips go to the pulp mill, particles go to particle boards, and the bark goes to the cogen plant, and that is the current situation. So where we're going to get this additional biomass? Well, we're going to have to go back in the forest and recover the residuals. That's going to come in, and it's going to come through the new project, the Biohub, where we will process that material. So there's a whole discussion that is going to be, how do we do that? and that is, obviously a challenge. And we're going to recover the heat from the cogen to provide the heat as a form of energy to dry the biomass. which will then be utilized in higher value applications like char tech to produce biochar, which will go either a soil amendment, but in reality, we're aiming for higher value biocarbons and metallurgical uses. So we're going to have to put in a good quality biomass in there. We're going to produce green hydrogen that's going to go into the trucking industry, as well as recover the biogenic CO2 that could be used for greenhouses in terms of agricultural growth, as well as potentially down the road for synthesis in terms of fuels such as, the combination of biogenics and high CO2 plus hydrogen to probably produce methanol. What is interesting about this concept is that, the economics are essentially local. I mean, we're not going out to large distances. We don't have, huge volumes. Biomass is what, could be categorized as, suffering from diseconomies of scale. So we've seen many projects, that looking for, million tons of material, and the economics are, disfavorable for that because one, security of supply, and the further out you go to recover that biomass, the more it costs. So there is kind of a sweet spot between keeping the distance close, improving the logistics, and reducing the cost of the material. Then, obviously, the intent is to use this material to create the platform, which will then be hopefully used in a phase 2 to expand. And, you can only build on success. So what's critical here is that we move into phase 1 and demonstrate that it can be done, and it can be done cost effectively. And for a topography, this is what the project will look like. The encircled green part is the cogen plant, the CVB, the biohub recovery will be located on our property, and the district energy system is the red line that will serve both the industrial park as well as the agricultural park across the highway. And char is going to be located next to the cogen plant, where the processed forest biomass, which will be, dried and sized, will be conveyed by conveyor belts directly to char, minimizing transportation costs. So what is the CVB and what it takes to make it work? Well, it has really 4 key components. And the challenge is to really reduce cost. It's not that forest biomass is not available, it's just that the cost to recover it is a challenge. So the 4 points that are brought to the table are: 1, how are we going to recover the biomass in the forest, given that this is a boreal forest? We're going to electrify equipment and reduce the use of diesel fuel equipment to the extent possible. We're going to reuse residual energy recovered from the biomass power plant to provide the drying capacity, meaning that there is not going to be any additional combustion that's going to be served for drying purposes. And 4, the plant concept that we're putting in place is built on a modular containerized unit, meaning that we minimize the on-site construction, investment costs, infrastructure, as well as being able to integrate it with the existing operations so that we don't have, additional operating costs. So what is the logistical challenge in recovering biomass in the boreal forest? Typically the wood is recovered by a harvester, and we're talking predominantly softwood. So picture it for people who can't. It's basically a stick with old branches. And in the past, many studies have been done to try to recover all the branches, and that was definitely a non-starter. The cost of recovering those branches are, because of density, it is just not feasible. So the objective here is to keep the density high and utilize existing operations equipment that are already in place and integrate with their operations to minimize machine time and displacement. So what we found was, trying to bring out branches. What you see here is a forwarder with the top and branches. The density is just not there. And then that material was brought to the roadside, and the traditional approach was that it was ground up with diesel equipment. Now, a diesel grinder that's 700 horsepower plus consumes 100 liter of diesel fuel an hour. And the GHG as well as the costs are associated with it are quite high. So if you don't have efficient machine usage, that machine ends up being highly costly and produces a tremendous amount of GHG. And what we've found is that because of this situation, we ended up creating little piles of material, meaning that the grinder had to displace and move along the path, and ultimately the efficiency was not there. So there was something that we had to do to kind of rejig what we were doing in the past, and it basically caused us to examine every element, from the roots to our plant. The last element was really the trucks itself, because once you grind the material, you're basically de-densifying it. It's more fluffy. So, and now you have to put it into a chip truck. Now, the chip trucks are not designed to go deep into the forest because of the nature of the roads. So there was a balance between how far the forwarder had to come to grind the material and how far the chip trucks had to travel. So the logical extension of that was, use bigger trucks that can travel quite far. So we basically came to the conclusion that trying to recover branches did not make sense. So we moved to an approach of what we called a baguette. Now, I guess for the French people, that's easy to kind of visualize. It's like a little loaf of bread. So it's basically what was left in the forest in terms of the treetop. Well, we asked the machines, the harvesters, to do one more movement. It was basically to cut an 8-foot piece at the top, which was normally left behind, and basically remove the branches. Now, we have a whole bunch of more baguettes, but the forwarder is able to meet maximum weight transport on its movements to bring it to the roadside. And on the roadside, we no longer grind the material on the roadside. What we do is we put it on the log trucks, just like the regular harvesting. And what you see there is a truck full of baguettes. Now, obviously, the number is quite high. And we bring it back to the plant where now we're using electrified equipment, electric grinders, as well as other equipment. And one key piece of equipment that we put in here is a rotary debarker. And why you say a rotary debarker? Well, the rotary debarker allows us to separate the bark from the white fiber, which is very important for the biochar application because the value of the biochar is really dependent on its contaminants, which are driven by the bark. So with this unit of operation, which is electrified, it allows us to, i.e., bump up the value of the recovered material, as well as using electric equipment.
Dino?
Yeah.
You think you can wrap it up in 2 or 3 minutes?
Yes. Why we went to char? Char is basically, I don't want to use the word simplistic in a negative sense, but in a positive sense. Its technology is robust. It is based on pyrolytic kilns, which have already existed and operated in many settings. And this allows us to, how would you say it, get a sense of comfort with its robustness and able to operate. Now, what is key here is that the RE provides a backstop to the plant, meaning that the cogen plant is essentially also a customer if the hydrogen market does not materialize, the quality of the hydrogen is not sufficient for whatever use. The power plant is always there to be the backstop customer of the hydrogen. Now, not desirable, but as opposed to having zero versus somebody who pays you, one is much more desirable. This enables the ability to finance a project, which allows the projects with a new technology envelope to move forward. Otherwise, trying to put a whole bunch of news in one sentence is a disaster for financing. And where do we want to put the hydrogen? Well, here's what we call regional versus long distance transport. We have regional transport, which is heavy transport, which is operating within a very short radius. And it allows us to move forward in decarbonizing heavy transport without having the burden of infrastructure. And that allows us to move forward. Once that is implemented, then the long distance transport can be easily integrated to that solution because you've laid the groundwork for the initial phase. I apologize for the rush in the last part, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dino. So Dino, you will remain available to answer questions that come your way while Brianna is presenting. We have 24 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we also learn all we can learn from this other case study. Brianna is a forest researcher with FP Innovations, a forester in training, a certified wildland fire ecologist, and she will talk to us today about the Biohub pilot project in Merritt, British Columbia.
Yes, thank you, Bruno. For the sake of time, I will just breeze through my own introduction because you did a good job on that. But yeah, this is the Biohub concept in Merritt, British Columbia. And I guess this one focuses more on the harvesting side of biomass utilization. So we're looking at how we can improve residual use rate from the planning stage and before any harvesting takes place. And yes, this is basically a reiteration of what Bruno just said, so I will skip through it for the sake of time. A little bit of information on FP Innovations, though. So we are a private, not-for-profit organization that spans across Canada. We work with academia and industry to develop innovative solutions that support the forest sector in Canada. FPI was established in 2007 as an amalgamation of 3 different companies. The first was Foreign Tech Canada Corporation, which was founded in 1918. The second is the Forest Engineering Research Institute of Canada, which was founded in 1975. And then the final one is the Pulp and Paper Research Institute of Canada, which was founded in 1925. So we are a newer company, but there's lots of history there. FPI has different offices in Vancouver, British Columbia, Montreal and Quebec City in Quebec, and Edmonton, Alberta, which is where I am presenting from today. And just as a short plug, we are hiring in the biomass and biohub kind of industry area within FP Innovations. So if anyone's interested in seeing what we're doing or potentially joining, just give us a quick Google search or send me an email. So for this talk, I'll briefly go over the situation in British Columbia that has led to more attention being given to biohubs and the bioindustry as a whole. I'll review the biohub concept that FPI has developed and how that concept is playing out in a case study within BC. And then there's a little bit of time at the end for questions if we have time. So the situation in British Columbia, which I'll shorten to BC as I move forward, is the result of policy changes and natural disturbances within the forest sector. So reductions in the annual allowable cut, the AAC, have been largely driven by old growth deferral areas and protections, dropping the AAC from 45 million cubic meters in 2021 to 38.5 million cubic meters in 2023. So this has resulted in many smaller mills having to close and others having to downsize. In addition to that, wildfire is a major contributor to timber loss. In 2023 alone, Canada burned 18.5 million hectares. In BC, that was 3 million of that total. Given the El Nino that we're experiencing this year and some drought predictions for the coming summer, it's likely that 2024 will also be an extreme fire season and follow that same pattern. So this has the forest industry seeking new ways to improve their fiber supplies and combat the economic losses that the AAC drops and wildfire events threaten. So the obvious answer at first was to increase residual fiber use and improve the markets for chip, mulch, and hog fuels from those residues. However, though traditional harvesting methods can leave this material piled at the roadside for later processing, in BC, pellet and pulp mills cannot always come and get it due to the long travel distances and the imbalance in cost of collection versus the profit from that material. So as a result, most of this residual fiber remains on blocks or is piled and burned when the weather allows. So the question then became, How can fiber be used without it being a sunk cost? And is there a way to transport it for easier processing and remove some of those barriers for use? And that's where this biohub concept comes into play. So the biohub in this case study is essentially a processing yard where full or whole trees are brought from the block and cut in a more centralized location. The foundation of this biohub is full use forestry, meaning all or as many parts of the tree as possible are processed with an end use in mind. This concept differs from traditional forestry as it happens in BC, wherein cut to length or roadside processing occurs in the field and cut stems are hauled directly to facilities. Residuals, which includes tops, butts, branches, breakage, and low-grade material, is then usually piled for pellet and pulp to come and get where it's feasible, or is burned when the season allows. The biohub removes the field processing aspect by hauling full uncut stems to the processing yard, which reduces the amount of residual fiber that gets left on the blocks, in theory. So this is just a simplified diagram of how the biohub operates in this case study. So first, trees are cut and pulled to the roadside. And one thing to note here is full tree harvest will require the removal of branches and tops by a processor in the block, whereas the whole tree harvest will leave that material intact. So the choice of either really depends on the tree species being harvested, as hauling specs must still meet the safety standards for each road, and the stems, regardless of which system is used, are then loaded onto a truck and hauled to the biohub or that processing yard. So at the yard, trucks are scaled in and unloaded, material is processed into various products, and that residual material that does not meet saw log specifications is then piled for later processing. The biohub enables various forest products to be developed in the processing yard, meaning different trucks may be needed for hauling processed material to end users. These trucks scale in, are loaded with the cut stems, and then scale out for delivery as needed. Once enough residual material has accumulated, it can be assessed for different product potential, such as chips, mulch, hog fuel, or firewood, and is either processed right away or stored until enough of a certain product can be developed to offset processing costs. For example, in this case study, they forecasted approximately 10,000 cubic meters of residual fiber would be needed to offset the cost of a chipper being brought in. So storing it until enough product accumulates, which could be over multiple blocks, is recommended. So the goal of the system, alongside full utilization, is to reduce wood processing costs, increase efficiencies, and add more value to forest products. With this as an objective to move towards zero waste and improve how forestry is conducted in BC. The biohub moves away from low-value products being piled and burned into blocks, and instead finds value for that residual fiber. This also helps reduce carbon emissions from pile burning and transport costs typically associated with that in block processing. So to test this, a biohub pilot project was created in Merritt, British Columbia, which is a small community of about 8,000 people located in the southern interior of the province. So Merritt is about an hour south of Kamloops, an hour west of Kelowna, and 4 hours northeast of Vancouver, to those who might be a little bit more familiar with British Columbia. It's a drier location within the interior Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone, which to those who don't know BC's forest systems, is a method by which we classify forest types. So in this case, the forest type in the area is mostly lodgepole pine, with Douglas fir, spruce, ponderosa pine, and subalpine fir making up the stands. So Stuick Resource Joint Venture is a group in Merritt that's a forestry company. It operates on behalf of 8 different First Nations in the area. And in early 2023, they began showing an interest in the biohub and wanted to develop a project that centered around full use forestry and shifting away from that cut to length procedures. So they partnered with FP Innovations to help develop that pilot. Stuick has an annual allowable cut of 174,000 cubic meters, and they were interested in the biohub as a means to improve their forestry operations, generate more jobs within the community, and offer more flexible products to the market. As the project developed, Stuick also partnered with Valley Carriers, which is a wood hauling company based in Merritt, and made use of their existing yard, previously used for stockpiling construction material and debris, and this became the biohub. Funding was provided in support by the province of British Columbia, including the Ministry of Forests and Innovation, Bioeconomy, and Indigenous Opportunities branch. This funding allowed FPI to also create the pilot report and business case. So to begin, a few blocks were selected for tree length harvesting, which was new to Stuick as they had mostly used cut to length operations. Equipment included a buncher, a skidder, a loader, and 2 processors, which were used in the field to limb the stems prior to loading onto the blocks. So this means that the branches and the tops were removed in the field prior to being brought to the processing yard, to the biohub. Logging trucks were configured with tri-axle pull trailers and were used to haul the tree length stems to the biohub in Merritt. And then that residual branch and top material that was left in the block was originally piled to be ground later, but was later redistributed back onto the block for coarse woody debris and soil management. So a waste assessment is scheduled for the spring when snow cover is gone from the blocks. But it is expected that there won't be anything substantial left to be assessed, given that all of the usable material was brought to the biohub. So the stems that were brought to the biohub were processed based on the products that could be made from each stem, which differs from cut to length procedures in the field that would have a predetermined length or type of product in mind for a given market. So as such, the biohub provided more flexibility for Stuick to decide what products could be made and to maximize log use rather than cutting viable pieces and leaving them in piles as low-grade residual fiber. Additionally, Stuick noted consistently high log quality from the material leaving the biohub, which was almost 100% on average. This was attributed to the processor operator having more time to assess each stem and decide where cuts should be made. Since the biohub is located within the community of Merritt, the operator could work between daylight hours and not have to commute long distances to the blocks, which enabled him to focus on quality over quantity. You can see from some of these images the different types of products leaving this biohub, including 8-foot peelers in the top image and the more standard 12 and 16-foot saw logs in the middle. The last picture shows some of the residual fiber left after processing that would have been piled or processed, or sorry, that will be piled and processed as chips or firewood, rather than being piled and burned in the field. So this project is ongoing. It's set to be completed by the end of February with final data written up in a report by FPI. The results will help answer one of the major questions that the province is interested in, which is, are the costs of running a biohub offset by the products produced? So products leaving the biohub include saw logs, peelers, and rail posts, as well as the biomass material that will leave either as firewood, mulch chips, or hog fuel, or a combination of those. Some non-monetary values arising from the biohub include some carbon offsets from not having to burn material or travel long distances to gather it, as well as social acceptance of full utilization programs. Given that Stuick is a partnership of 8 different First Nations, more environmentally aware operations are encouraged and requested, and any new job creation from the community, from the biohub will benefit those in those communities. The costs of the biohub include the yard and facility use, which includes scale operations, equipment and operator wages, fuel and maintenance, trucking costs, and the processing of the residual material. And so these have to kind of offset to see if what we produce outweighs what we have to spend. So if the biohub proves to be an economically viable option moving forward, it is likely that more communities will show an interest in this work and want to develop their own biohubs and processing yards. And we're eager to see the results and hope that will steer BC towards better forest management and residual use. Okay, very quick. I apologize if I spoke very fast, but I've left some time for questions for myself and for the other panelists as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Brianna, for your presentation and leaving some time for questions. There's quite a bit of interest in the chat for baguettes. Maybe it's because lunchtime is coming soon in Eastern Canada and people are hungry for knowledge. So Dean,
no mustard or mayo.
No. So 2 questions that are kind of related from Marianne. Why did not use full tree harvest and transportation as what Brianna suggested in our own case study? And then there was also another question that kind of related to difficulty of forest harvesting companies to make the changes to handle those baguettes.
Actually, the answer is quite simple. We're in the boreal forest, so the trees that we're looking at are, coniferous, meaning that, big pole in the middle with small branches. So, and the harvesting that is done for the recovery of saw logs. So, it's only short wood harvesting. It's not a drag by full length trees by the roadside. That is typically normally found in some of the hardwoods because of the bouquet type of tree itself, where it may be too hard to delimb in the forest. So the process operations are the harvester would catch the tree, delimit and cut the length, and cuts the length to the forwarder's requirements. So that it's basically driven by the nature of the forest.
Thank you, Dino. Brianna, very pointed question from Jordan. Maybe you can answer, or maybe it will be in the report that you mentioned. How much is the delivered cost of biomass through the hub versus local pulpwood or hog fuel?
Let me unmute first. This will be answered in the report. We're still waiting for that final data to come through that has all that cost information. So hopefully that will be answered when we publish this. And yeah, you're always welcome to reach out to myself or Stuart as well for these more direct questions if I'm able to answer them. But yeah, at this point, I can't. So pending, yeah.
Thanks, Brianna. So maybe a question for both of you, Dino and Brianna, from Richard. Any idea of the differences in transport efficiency between stem and log transport?
Yeah, I mean, from our side, what we saw is that the carrying weight of the trucks with logs or the baguettes, we max out, depending on the time of year, between 35 to 38 tons of transport weight. Typically, when we chip it, because of the density, and you can't compact that chip in the truck, the chip truck max out in volume before weight. So we are typically seeing about, depending on the nature of the product, about 29 tons, 28 tons per truck.
Yeah,
versus 35.
Yeah, and so like with the biohub that we use with that tree length delivering, I think coming across the scale from the field, we were averaging around 35,000 kilograms. And then leaving, it really depended on the product. So the peeler weights were kind of around 30, and then the saw log lengths, the 12 and 16s, were kind of closer to the 45,000 kilograms. So for transport efficiency, though, the reason we went with the tree length harvesting system, where we cut off the tops and the branches of the trees prior to hauling, was mostly because there was a 1.5 hour distance between the biohub and the blocks. So trucks had to use the Coquihalla, which is a pretty extensive highway between Merritt and the blocks, to access the units, and then when they were coming back, they use a back road, so it wasn't on the highway. But we still have to meet those specs that like safety specifications for load lengths, and the size of the trees they were pulling out of these blocks were just too bushy to have them as whole trees on the back of the trailers. So that's kind of the decision that was driving the tree length versus whole length. I don't know if that was exactly your question, but yeah.
Thanks, Brianna. A question probably more for Dino from Simeon. Do you plan or do you return ash from biomass combustion to the forest as fertilizer, or like what do you do with the ash from combustion, or like I guess biochar production?
Yep. Well, actually, we have two types of ash. One coming from what we call the fly ash, which is much finer material. And if you look at the slide, it goes into the agricultural lands. Most of the lands around the agricultural lands around the power plant are certified biological, and we're able to use it as a soil amendment in agricultural lands next to the plant. The bottom ash, which is much more coarse and rough, is actually used in some unpaved road applications. So all the material is actually utilized.
Thank you, Dino. Would you like to answer any other question from the Q&A, Dino and Brianna? There is one regarding air quality and emissions, and those vary greatly depending on scale and location and industry. So I don't know, maybe Dino, you want to comment on that?
On the air emissions, obviously we are constrained by the Quebec Government Environmental Agency in terms of what we put in the atmosphere. We're also one of the few, potentially in Canada, biomass power plants that uses an SNCR to control NOx. So the level of NOx production and particulate emission from the biomass energy side is actually very, very low. And on the biochar, most of that combustion is going to be captured, meaning we're not going to be producing combustion flue gases. We're going to be using those gases as syngas to upgrade to hydrogen, and unused residual energy potential comes back to the power plant and goes through the normal environmental requirements.
I can also add that it also depends really on the technology. And if we talk about combustion, and I will say district heating level combustion, then one can also install a flue gas condenser that also increases the heat recovery, so heat efficiency of that plant, so you get more energy with less biomass engaged. And also all the flue gases that have particle matter are collected in that condenser. So that's also something that one can do. But in general, every region has Air Quality Act. At least we have such rules in Europe, and this is for the industrial producers and large combustion plants. And for the households that are also using and also polluting with particle matter, I dare to say sometimes even more than the industrial combustion sources, they are regulated by eco design. So one cannot buy a private pellet fuel wood stove, which is, have low efficiency combustion.
Yeah, just to comment back on that, here in Quebec, it's the reverse. The industrial have a much, much higher target levels for emission requirements than the residential individual. So the requirements from the power plant are much higher. Where we have cyclones, ESPs in the back end, and a whole bunch of constraints on what comes out, what we can use. So the level of requirements on the power plant are much higher.
It is the same in Europe. Maybe I was not,
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's the same.
Well, thank you, Biana and Dino. We are coming to the end of the webinar. I want to thank all the presenters again for taking the time to participate today and present learnings from the research or the case studies that they've undertook. I also want to thank all the participants. There was a lively chat, lively Q&A, so it was good to see that people were engaged and were eager to learn more from the speakers. For the IEA Bioenergy work specifically, the report is coming soon. It would be made available online on the IEA Bioenergy website. And I believe the presentations and the recordings will also be made available on the IEA Bioenergy website. So if you want to tune back in because you're passionate about biohubs and you felt you missed maybe a bit of information, then you can always share the link or re-listen to the presentation at your convenience. So I want to thank everyone again. For those in Europe, have a great dinner. For those in Canada, depending on where you are, have a great lunch or a great morning. And yeah, stay tuned and look at the website for upcoming updates.
Thank you, Bruno, for hosting us.
Thank you, Ro.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.